inside the recording studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and this is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Jody. How are you doing?
I am recovering still, but I'm doing well.
That's good. What's been going on with your week? Anything fun?
Bed rest.
Yeah.
That's what's been going on with my week. Bed rest.
Yeah, not exciting, but probably the best course of action.
Well, I did go skiing yesterday, but
as you do,
as one does when they're thinking I am invincible and I'm feeling better, and then you realize, well, that was kind of stupid.
Oh well, yes. Worse things have happened, right?
Yes, this morning.
Okay, I'm a little bit scared to unpack that.
Let's not.
Question. Okay, let's not. We'll leave that alone. That's for another program, perhaps.
Yes.
All right. Cool. So, if anybody's listening, thank you for listening. And today we're going to talk about acoustic guitars in the studio.
Oh, is that like organic instrumentation?
Organic, yeah. There's no apps for that. Well, there probably is, but
I think
that's not what we're talking about
for that. But
yeah,
yeah,
we're not talking about those today. We're talking about acoustic guitar. So we'll just dive right in, I think. And there's obviously going to be a lot of cross-pollination between recording acoustic guitars and electric guitars, like we talked about in the last episode, in the sense that you obviously want to make sure that your guitar is in good working order.
Oh, I thought you were like bringing in a colony of bees.
That's in the advanced podcast.
I was thinking like reproductive producing for guitars. So.
Get your mind out of the gutter, Jody. Yeah. But obviously the things that really shouldn't need to be said, but we're going to say it anyway, is, make sure your guitar is intonated, reasonably fresh strings, that kind of thing. There's no rattles or hums, or at least kept to a minimum.
Yeah, that can be generally helpful for good acoustic guitars.
Yeah. Actually, it could probably be helpful for any instrument that you're playing, right? Have it working when you get about to track. But we're talking acoustic guitars today, so that's our point, and we're sticking to it. And if you're not handy with, setting up a guitar and stuff yourself, take it to somebody who is.
Go to a good luthier.
Yeah.
Or a repair guy. Either way, whichever way you want to call them.
Right. And they'll be happy to do it for you.
For a price, I'm sure.
Right. So you do a lot more acoustic guitar recording than I do.
Chances are.
Yeah. So what is your go-to technique for tracking acoustic guitars?
Finding a guitar player that can play.
Step one.
Step one. Get a guitar player that can play. No.
You already am. Yeah.
Say that again?
I'm saying you already are a guitar player that can play that. So
some people seem to think so I'll roll with it.
Sure. Take a compliment.
No, I will not.
Right.
My go-to technique is actually a combination of using microphones and direct signals, actually. Is my go-to thing. Yes.
How many mics?
Sometimes one, sometimes two.
Yeah.
It's depending on how sparse the arrangement is. The more sparse the arrangement, the more I like to capture it once. Is probably the best way to say that.
Bigger, wider sound type of thing?
Yeah. More diversity in the sound, or more complete picture of the sound, is probably the best way to say it. The reason behind that is if you're doing, say, a guitar and vocal, and it's meant to be like just that, and not even for demo purpose, but for like high end, like this is what it's going to be, just a guitar and vocal. I will run 2 mics and a direct on that.
Yeah. And where do you point those? Where do you generally place them?
Again, this is program material dependent. But more often than not, there will be one mic that is pointed perpendicular to the 12th fret.
Okay.
And then a second mic that is going to be somewhere around pointing at the sound hole or somewhere behind the saddle. area, depending on how woolly and thick it needs to be and what mic is actually being used. And then, of
Right.
course, there's the direct signal. So the direct signal is also running at the same time.
Right. And why do you run a direct signal as well?
Well, it has a lot to do with the fact that mids are generally much more clear sounding in a direct signal. Not so much the high end, because oftentimes most direct signals sound like ping pong balls slapping off water in the high
Right.
end.
Uh-huh.
But for the lows and the low mids in that area, the direct signal tends to do really well for me.
Good.
So,
Interesting.
and then
Yeah.
blending all three of those becomes the magic dance of keeping everything in phase as much as
Sure.
possible. So that
Right.
requires a guitar player that can actually perform very still, like a statue almost in a way, without disrupting their passionate play.
Yeah. Yeah, because that could be an issue, can't it? If you're moving around and you got multiple mics,
Well, yeah, because if you've
you're
got your mic set and they're actually in phase, and all of a sudden the guitar player twists slightly to one side or the other, well, now you've altered the relationship between the microphones and the
right.
distance. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that does become a problem.
Right. Why did my chord disappear when I played that? Yeah. Yeah, no,
I
those are little
twisted like
things.
Pete Townsend going for a wind up.
Right. But I guess that if that is an issue for the player, I mean, anytime that you're miking, even if it's just one mic, you're risking a little bit of that, not necessarily phase cancellation, but the change of the sound. So it's
Yes.
something to consider when you're choosing or trying different techniques.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
yeah, so when you do, not only at setup time, but do you find that you're doing a lot of editing for phase after the fact?
Well, I do one phase or one step of phase audio editing after the fact,
Right.
especially in a multi-mic in a direct situation like that. Um, that
And do you use then the DI as sort of like the gauge that you go to, or does that depend?
it depends on which signal is actually reaching the computer first. Sometimes it's a DI, and oddly enough, sometimes it's one of the mics.
Really?
Yeah, I haven't been able to determine what causes that odd situation. Maybe it's the length of the cable being used at the time. I don't know. Could be.
Is that ultra fast playing that you do in the cable can't keep up, right?
Yeah. I've got my drill with the guitar pick on the end, and it needs to be super like precise. Paul
Right.
Gilbert
Right.
style or Eddie Van Halen style or whoever does the drill bits now. No, it's just sometimes it's odd. The computer sometimes gets the direct signal first. Sometimes the mic signal comes in sooner, and it could maybe just be the combination of what's being used on the input. I'm not sure.
Right.
Well, actually,
Right.
I should be sure. It is stuff that's being used on the input. If there's a lot more stuff on one chain than the other going on in the input, that creates a slight bit more delay.
Right.
So, and that's why it's minute stuff. And then after it's recorded, in doing that, I use a delay plugin from Eventide that is called Precision Time Align, I believe is the name of it. And that allows me to put the plugin on whatever track is behind and actually shift it, or I can put it on a track that's ahead and shift it behind, or vice versa, and allow it to line it up. And the reason why I like to use that one is it's actually it goes to a 64th of a second or something like that, which is higher resolution than most DAWs do.
Yeah.
So it can do
Yeah.
subsamples in terms of movement, which is neat. It's not ultimately necessary on acoustic guitar, but it's a very nice plugin, and it gets things lined up. And it's amazing how much the character of the sound will change based on the phase.
Yes. Yeah. Even I've noticed that as well. Especially when you're tracking drums and things like that. And even the smallest things that you think wouldn't matter, it actually makes a big impact, larger than you
Yes,
think.
yes, it does. It makes a huge
Yeah,
impact. So in that regard, depending on how much bass sound I want coming out, then I can actually tailor the amount of phasing, so to speak, to happen to control the low end if needed,
right.
which
Yeah,
is nice.
right. So when you're going in, you mentioned that you're using some sort of processing at the tracking stage.
Yes.
So when you are tracking, how much are you doing as far as like EQ wise on the signal going in versus mic placement to kind of, I'm assuming you get as close as you can to the mic placement first and then do any kind of necessary
EQing.
EQing going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the general gist. The first thing I like to do is figure out what vibe does the song need. That'll
sure.
usually dictate what kind of guitar. Then it's like, because I have the technology, I will choose what kind of board do I want it to sound like it's running through. Do I want an SSL? Do I want a Helios? Do I want an API? Do I want a Neve? Blah, 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 blah.
Right,
So I actually like do a chain based on what a full-blown world-class recording studio would have depending upon the board that they use, and it goes from the mic to the mic pre into the channel strip. From there, it might get a little bit of compression and a little bit of tape saturation on the way in. That way I don't have to worry about it later. So I dial that sound all in up front. And then, of course, if I'm using two mics or one mic in a direct or two mics in a direct, I blend all those before I get all that set up before I actually track so that the sound is as close as possible without needing to do anything after the fact,
right, right.
other than the
Yeah,
phase cancellation stuff,
sure,
which has to
sure.
happen after you record. You can't really do that prior.
Right. With you mentioned EQ and compression there.
Yeah.
I'm assuming again the amount of compression you might apply going in depends on playing style and what type of song they're going to do, what kind of dynamics you're working on, or do you kind of just gently smooth it out a little bit on the way in just to ensure you won't get any unnecessary unwelcome spikes or anything like that, or what's your thought on that?
Well, again, it's a preference thing based on the vibe of the song. So
Right.
if the song is mellow, I'm probably going to compress either with a Fairchild or a LA2A,
Okay.
mainly because those two give a real nice mellow compression to them. You don't have to strike them really hard, and it's just catching every, little things that may come out of place. If it's
Yeah.
something more rock, upbeat, funky, and requires a bit more attack, I'll probably go with an 1176 or a
Uh-huh.
distressor or something of that nature that's
Yeah.
going to be a little bit more clampy, but still give a real good dynamic to the sound without making it sound smushed, unless it needs to sound smushed.
Sure. Yeah. You should probably mention that you're talking about emulations here, before somebody comes and breaks into your house looking for a Fairchild.
Right.
So,
Yeah. These are all plugins that are a part of the universal audio system that I have.
ri right.
And so, yeah, this isn't like the real vintage gear of that nature. And no, it wouldn't be fun to have somebody bring, where's that Fairchild? Does he keep it in a safe or something? And if I have
Right,
one,
because
I
I can't
might.
find it. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, but that's interesting, and a common theme, with, the next couple of podcasts here that we do when we're talking about different, instrumentation and how to track them. So much obviously is dependent on the material of
Well,
what kind
yeah.
of song and what kind of vibe, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm not one of those producer types or even one of those writing and composing types that sticks to one thing.
right,
Yeah, I might be
right.
working
No,
on
but
a
I
hip
mean,
hop track one day, a country track another day, a metal track another day after that, a pop track, and then an Americana track. It depends on the sound that you're working on that you need
right,
to know your gear well enough to know what it is and what it
sure,
can do for what sound you want.
yeah.
And
So
that's
when
very I mean, acoustic guitars are real easy to mess up, and they're also real, it's one of those things that is the organic nature of it is one of those things that you really have to know what you're doing when it comes to that to get an awesome sound out of it.
Right. But I think also the fact of it is that most people have heard an acoustic guitar, so
Yeah,
it's one of the,
that
but
doesn't mean
that
they know
doesn't
how
necessarily.
it gets recorded.
No,
Big
that but
difference.
that was not going to be my point. But it's such an organic thing that I think you if there are certain little imperfections in that, depending on the song, I think it's something that the ear can sort of like compensate for or forgive for that because it's
Sure.
an acoustic guitar. I know what that sounds like. Um, so where do we go? Yeah. So one thing I wanted to go back to, you mentioned you had the EQ and all the, but your miking techniques.
Yes.
Um, let's say that first off, your acoustic guitar may not have an internal pickup, so there is no DI, and you only have one microphone.
Yes.
Again, we're painting with broad strokes here,
Here's a broad
but
paint stroke. Here's a single mic right here.
let's see it. Ooh,
Oh,
look at that.
isn't that beautiful? It's a
Is that an
Telefunken MD1A. Or no, it's not. That's Telefunken doesn't make the MD1A. Telefunken makes the M80 and the M81, and this happens to be an M81. So
okay? So that let's say that you have
nice dynamic
that,
mic.
or you just have, let's say that you own a 57 or a 58.
I do.
Yeah, well, I know you do, but let's pretend for a second that the person that might listen to this, I don't have C12 or I don't have a Neumann, whatever. So how would you go about first just miking it up? Because I mean, there's the old joke: how do you mic something? So, well, I don't know. Get a mic and point it toward the instrument, right?
That's the
but
easiest way to try it.
right. So where would you sort of aim? Because I think a common thing is to just kind of, okay, well, I'll just kind of point it at the sound hole, but that's not necessarily the best result, is it?
Well, it depends on what the mic type is and how well it picks certain things up. Again, that's a whole dependent thing. Uh,
Sure.
Generally speaking, with a dynamic mic, most often I point it at the 12th fret, perpendicular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
like
if
a
the neck is like
45-degree
this,
angle.
it will know. Yeah.
Oh, you
So
actually go a 90-degree
90,
angle.
right at the 12th fret. Yeah.
Okay.
Main reason for that is you're going to get a good range on it without it sounding overly woolly in the low end, without it sounding overly bright on the top end, because you're
Right.
not trying to accentuate anything other than catching kind of a, I don't know where the 12th fret thing came from, but it's a common thing to point 90 degrees right
Right.
at the 12th fret.
Well, it's the middle
So
of the string.
it is kind of the
So
middle of the
yeah,
string, or at least it's
it's a
supposed to be if the math is
yeah.
correct.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, it's the middle of the string. So, but also I think it's that balance between when you get the fretted note and you're not just getting, either the pick attack and the scratching of the pick or anything like that might just poke out, or you might get too boomy or something like that. So I
Yep.
guess we can recommend that the 12th fret theory or technique is a good starting point at least,
It can
and
be a very good starting
you
point.
kind of, yeah, and then you move away or around from there.
Yeah, you do the
Um,
old Al Schmidt thing. You just keep kind of moving it, whether you turn it on an axis or if you pull it further out or back or closer in, whatever.
right.
You just move it until that's where it is, and then you tell the guitar player, "Don't move,
Yeah.
play like
Right.
that from right there as much as
Yeah.
you can."
Right.
There was one time though, years ago, I was at a studio in Orange County,
Yeah.
and it was a like songwriter group talking about their production techniques and that kind of thing, and they got some girl in the group to go into the live room and put on a guitar and start playing, and the engineer, whoever he was, didn't have a super firm grasp, and they were trying to mic it up and show everybody, hey, this is how you do it, and everybody's kind of in the control room going, this sounds awful.
Yeah.
So whatever he was doing, he wasn't getting it right. And at one
r-
point, I just made the suggestion, why don't we take the mic, put it behind the body and point it up towards the neck? Because it
Yeah.
just struck me as like, well, they're trying to get this particular sound and they're getting nowhere near it. So what they did is they had person go out, they stuck the mic behind her strumming arm and pointed it up towards the neck.
Mhm.
And we all went back into the control room, and all of a sudden, bingo, the sound was there, and everybody's like, "Hey, that sounds really damn good." And the engineer guy turns to the next minute, he's, what made you think of that? And I said, "Well, you were trying to get some stuff, and this mic wasn't working for you, and I was just thinking, how do I capture all those sounds down the length of the instrument like that?" And
Right.
I made the suggestion, and it would happen to be a fortunately good suggestion that worked out for that particular situation and setup that they were trying to do. So sometimes you just have to think it through of like, what am I trying to capture here? And will this mic capture it if I do certain things? Because there's certain mics, like if I did that with an MD1A and took it from the back and pointed it up down towards the neck across the length of the body, it might sound overly woolly and
Yeah.
lose a lot of like the upper mids and everything doing that, just because it's a dark mic and it's going to really accentuate the low ends that it's sitting next to.
Yeah.
Whereas if I had a PCM mic from Radio Shack, I might be able to just stick it with some tape straight to the body of the guitar,
Maybe.
and
Yeah.
it might sound brilliant that way. But it's dependent upon the mic, the room that you're in, and everything else that's going on. You have to listen. It's that Al Schmidt concept.
Yeah.
Move the
No, that
mic until it sounds good.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's good starting points, but then obviously one shouldn't be so set in their ways like this is how I always do it. If it doesn't work, then try something different. You might stumble upon something like
Which
you were
I
just
have done.
describing.
I have done
Right.
that very recently. I have
Yeah.
a nylon string guitar, and I also have
Hmm.
this fancy little device that's like a little mic stand that comes up about, I don't know, foot and a half, maybe maximum off the ground. Generally meant for miking guitar cabinets, I think, or kick
Mm,
drums and that kind of thing.
right.
I was recording a Spanishy guitar from a nylon string guitar, and I thought, man, this just sounds not the way I want it to. How do I get this more Spanishy sound? As
You got another player,
I
right?
gotta go like make some Spanish fried rice and throw it at the guitar or something. I don't know.
Right.
That's a part of that definition of wordology that producers have to understand from an artist of like, I need it to sound more blue. Okay.
Yeah.
So you try to figure that out. I needed it to sound more Spanishy in a way and a little bit more lo-fi. So I took a dynamic mic, stuck it on that short little stand on the floor and pointed it 45 degrees up at the neck
Toward the
around,
guitar. Huh.
I think I pointed it right at where the neck joint met the guitar body. And it's like all of a sudden, bingo, there it is, the sound that I was like, oh,
Wow.
there it is. And it sounded great.
Yeah.
Single mic, no direct, just a single mic on that one. And
Right.
it worked out great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, experimentation is good. I mean, I've heard of another one. I don't think I've ever tried this one personally, but um, the technique would be to actually mic around the player's ear, right
Yeah,
over their
you
shoulder.
mentioned that to me before. I've not actually done it, and I would assume that means that you're pointing the mic down at the body of the guitar.
Sure. So the idea being there that, for some players, I guess it can be a little bit jarring to kind of like when you're not, I'm used to hearing my guitar like this and not after it's tracked. So it could be one of those things where you essentially get player's perspective on the sound.
Yeah.
So it's not,
Pardon me.
wouldn't be my go-to. Obviously it isn't.
Well, I could see it
But
being done if you use it as a technique to be a comfort thing in the
yes,
studio. Not
right.
necessarily as part of the mix, but you set up a mic so that that's the signal that they get back at them as they're recording the other signal you're actually trying to capture. Could it be
Could be.
useful in a situation? Sure. Again, it depends
Yeah,
on the vibe of the song and what it calls for in terms of the
right.
arrangement. But going from the ear down at the guitar just to appease a player's like mental stability in the performance might be a good thing.
Right. Yeah. Sounds like something Eric Valentine would do to me. Yeah.
Quite possible. Eric being one
Right.
of those amazing producers and mix engineers as it is.
Right. Right. So we talked a little bit about different techniques, obviously, depending on what microphones you have, what to use. But what do you think are some benefits and drawbacks of either just DIing or just miking?
Uh, I don't know if there's necessarily drawbacks. I guess it comes down to what does that song need? What does that arrangement need? And can you
Right.
supply it with what you have? If you can't supply it with what you have, then no matter what you do, it's going to be a disaster. Well, not a disaster. It's just going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And one thing I've started doing with the direct signals that is relatively new is that after it's recorded, I run it through an Ocean Way plugin,
Oh,
being
the
the
the the
Ocean Way,
room thing?
the room
Yeah.
thing from Ocean Way, or I might try another room simulator type thing to run the direct signal through. But the nice thing about the Ocean Way one is that you can remic, so to speak. So you can choose what mic is that sound source going through, not just being a reverb, but being the source of what it's going through as well. And that actually takes that direct signal and almost turns it into what sounds like a mic'd signal in a sense.
So if you were to do that, just out of curiosity, would you use that completely wet then, or
Oh
would
yeah,
you
yeah,
still have?
100% wet.
Yeah,
If
okay.
I'm gonna run it through the Ocean Way plugin as a remic and kind of get a different vibe for a room sound on it, I am
Yeah. So you
100%
you
wet.
right, so you think it's not in addition to, it's instead of, you're essentially
Yes.
replacing. Okay,
Replacing it
gotcha.
with
Yeah.
what would
With,
be, it's almost like remiking a guitar amp.
right. Yeah, similar concept then, yeah.
Similar concept, but you're doing it with
Hmm,
a acoustic direct signal. And
right.
that's sometimes I do it a lot more now than I used to. I used to actually just blend in the direct signal with the mic signal to, not for the high end. Usually I'd roll the high end off because again, it was like those signals tend to be like ping pong balls slapping off water.
Right,
And
yeah,
you generally don't necessarily want that, but you want all the other warmth that can come in from the direct signal, and you just blend it in to the mic signal, and the mic gets you all the air and everything else, hopefully, and then the direct signal gets you the real intimate, right in your ear hole sound.
yeah, right, yeah. So I guess that would be one of the drawbacks if you only are able to do a DI, where you're stuck with whatever that guitar sounds like.
Unless you
In
can
a
run
s
it through
in
something like Ocean Way.
Yeah, unless you have that option, right? But I guess a benefit of just DIing would be if you're, let's say, if you're in a bedroom somewhere and it's the middle of the night, or you're well, actually, the time of day doesn't really matter. But let's say that there's dogs barking like there was outside my window here a minute ago. Um, but where it's a noisy environment.
Sure, and if
So,
you were Phineas and Billie Eilish, you'd just stop, you'd wait for the noise to go away, and then you'd do it again.
well, sure, sure. So, but there are workarounds of everything, obviously,
Sure.
and again, it comes down to ultimately the gear that you have and the sound that you're trying to achieve, and you just choose to get, or try to get, as close as you can to that. Um, I would say, when you mentioned EQing on the way in, the things to be, um,
Cognizant of.
ooh, extra bonus word points for you. Once again, I'm not from your country. Um, um, but
Pardon me, I'm still coughing up gunk.
you sound like you're not well over there, but you're
Sounds
a
like I've
pro.
been
So,
smoking cigarettes for like 70 years,
yeah,
nonstop packs a day, but no, that's not the case. I don't do that.
yeah. But issues that may happen with low end rumble, perhaps,
Yep.
or
Yep.
overly sibilant things, and so, and then of course, one thing that we didn't even mention yet is, are we playing steel string? Are we playing nylon string? I mean, you brought up your nylon string
Yep.
miking there, but a little bit of a different technique and things to consider. And also, post processing, I guess, when you end up mixing acoustic guitar, um, just because it sounds great in a room, depending on how it's used, it might not sit very well in the track. So if you're
Yep.
using it as a layering thing, which would be more of an arrangement type of a podcast, but um, what it's doing there, you might need it to do something else, or sound in a different way. So if you got
Yeah.
something, you
Well,
got like a heavier rock tune, and you just wanted to kind of support the guitarist and having like an aggressive sort of eighth note strumming type of a thing. Maybe you don't need to worry about if it sounds super pretty by itself, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't, make it as good as you can, but consider where it's going to go in the song.
Yeah, arrangement's a big thing when it comes to organic well, it does not even organic instruments, every instruments,
So
but it just
every
becomes
instrument,
a
yeah,
little bit more difficult to deal with sometimes with organic instruments.
yeah.
So,
So yeah, so
in terms of like strings though, you're mentioning the difference between nylon and steel string. Well, there's a
right,
chasm of difference in terms of the sonic quality of each string. And you were also talking earlier before we got started about string gauges. So I'm going to say, what is your theory behind this string gauge thing if we're talking steel strings or even nylon strings for that matter?
yeah. I have a feeling that you and I are going to differ on this, but
You don't say.
I do say,
Say it
um,
anyway.
well, most people fetishize using thicker strings as always sounding better, right?
Fetishize. Boy,
Yeah,
that's a new word.
I got another word point back.
Yay.
Yeah, no, and to a certain degree, I think there's truth to that, and I don't think anybody's ever listened to a track and go, "Ooh, that would have sounded so much better if you had played 14s," or "Ooh,
I'd
I
say
would."
that.
Yeah, you
I'm
would, wouldn't you?
kidding.
But I think for me, because I have hands like a 12-year-old girl,
I
not
don't.
like, no, you certainly don't. You could probably grip a basketball, but so for me, I accepted myself that the playability factor is more important than what people tell you that, oh, you have to use this string gauge. Um, that being said, one thing that can happen when we're playing, let's say that, for example, that I said you got that eighth note chugging thing, or if you're strumming just big, beautiful chords, if you let your emotion get away from you a little bit and you start hitting harder and harder, if your strings are too light of a gauge, it's very easy to start bending notes out of tune. So I think that is sort of like the determining factor for me. Like if I'm
How hard you
tracking into,
hit?
yes,
Okay.
versus like your fretting hand, and just the comfort factor there. I think if you're struggling to play a set of 12s, which would be like a standard gauge, don't be afraid to go down, to 11s or maybe even 10s. I've actually put 10s on an acoustic guitar, which is really, really light.
Does that
But it
sound like
depends.
strumming spaghetti?
No, it does not. So it depends on what you want to do. But my only caution is to go, if you go like really light, is just that depending on when you're playing and you're tracking, it's very easy to let emotion get away, and you might be fretting a little bit too hard, or you're hitting too hard, so that you might to cause things to get out of tune.
You're not going to like this then, because I am about to say, if you can't let your emotions get into the music because it's going to send it out of tune, how good is that?
Well, but that's what I'm saying.
I'm
That's
just
the
kidding.
balance, right?
Yeah.
No, but that's a very valid point, right? The more you get to track and do things like that, but if you can't play a certain part because your strings are too heavy, you have to find that balance.
Yeah, I
So I
just thought
don't
of
think,
Spinal Tap. If you can't play the part, it must be your
yeah,
girlfriend or your
yeah.
boyfriend.
So I know the part. Well, if you knew the part, you fucking play it, wouldn't you?
That's right. Damn
Yeah.
it.
So many great quotes in that movie. So sounding like it's a thin line between stupid and clever here.
Yes.
Yeah, see, like what I did there. Find the right string gauge. Don't play something just because you think that the thicker the string is going to be, the better it's going to sound. Because I don't think that's the case.
Again, it's an arrangement thing. Apparently, it's also
No,
an emotional thing too.
well,
I'm just
but if
kidding.
you, yeah,
I'm
I
kidding.
know, but I don't think it's an arrangement thing in that case. It's what allows you to play the part the best That's the kind of string. It's not going to sound better if you're playing on 13s as opposed to 12s. It's just not. So, but if you're like Uncle Jody here, have lumberjack hands, right? And big, strong claws, you get away with it. And there's that being said, there's no benefit of going lighter than you're comfortable with.
Not really.
So,
No.
yeah. So have the playability factor be the determining point that you want to do when you're choosing those. I don't think you necessarily have to go super heavy.
Yeah, make it playable.
Yeah.
If you can't bend a 13 and you need a bend, get a gauge that can bend.
Right.
I suppose is a good way of saying
So,
it. Or put
yeah.
a guitar together that can do it.
That too. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
get somebody else to play it.
Oh, yeah.
But that's my thought on that.
Well, there it is.
There it is. So on that note, anything else that you want to add? I think we kind of covered all the things that I thought we should talk about. We should probably maybe put up a few things on the site with some audio examples of different miking techniques.
We can throw up a
at some
couple of
point.
different audio examples of what certain mic setups can sound like as little examples. Maybe
Yeah.
give a 2-minute Tuesday tip for that as well.
There we go. Sounds good.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Jody. So thank you for listening, everybody, and for listening. Thank you to you, Jody, for listening to me ramble here.
I'm listening, and I'm just going to spew right back at you.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Let's call it an episode, and we'll be back with another one shortly.
Yeah, I believe the next episode we're going to be talking about bass.
Ooh, more
Bass.
stringed instruments.
Or is that a type of fish, or is that a bass?
Things that we
Yes,
discuss in the next episode.
That's right. So, sayonara to everyone out there in inside this recording studio land.